Welcome to Early Adopter, the podcast where we help make AI your unfair advantage. I'm Jess, marketing exec by day, AI experimenter by day, night, and basically every other waking moment in between at this point.
And I'm Kyle, your resident tech guru. I've spent the last decade building data systems, products, and AI tools that solve real-world problems. My goal is to cut through the noise and show you how this tech actually works for your business. Each week, we'll break down AI concepts, tools, or trends that actually matter for your business. We'll explain what it is, why you should care, and how to use it without needing a computer science degree.
So whether you're a small business owner, an entrepreneur, or you're just tech curious, grab your coffee, close that tab where you've been staring at ChatGPT for the past 3 weeks wondering what to do with it, and let's dive in. Just think of us as your guides through the wild, wonderful, and sometimes completely overwhelming world of AI.
This is Early Adopter.
Welcome back to Early Adopter, the podcast where we help make AI your unfair advantage. I'm Jess.
And I'm Kyle. How's your week been, Jess?
Well, first of all, Kyle, I'm going to comment on the fact that we are unintentionally matching, so that is slightly terrifying. I think you're copying me because, I always wear black, so this is my trademark.
That's true. Black is definitely your color, so
it's my only.
I'm channeling Jess, so we could be matchy-matchy.
Exactly. But other than that, my week has been pretty tricky. I've just, as you know, I've just moved. And I didn't get Wi-Fi for the first 10 days that I was in my new place, which you think is going to be tolerable, and it was actually so much worse than I thought it was going to be. So it's been quite difficult to do things like record a podcast without Wi-Fi.
I mean, we're so dependent on Wi-Fi and internet connection these days. It's not until you lose it that you appreciate just like how much our world. That and our phone. Between our phone and our Wi-Fi, we are so dependent. We're all to go down. We're all screwed.
Anyway,
my week? Week's been okay. Had a little bit of, family drama, but everyone's okay. Yeah, my grandmother had a short little stint in the hospital, but she's doing okay now. She's hopefully stronger than ever. And but the good news of it was I got to spend some good quality time with her. Kind of in the hospital room, and you don't get enough time, like dedicated time with family these days. So actually, in some ways, it's like a nice.
That's true.
It's the gift in all of it, for sure.
It is not the circumstances that you would want, perhaps, but at least you got to spend time with her.
But it's all about getting to spend time with good people, which I think is a great segue for the pod, right?
I think you're right. So. Today's episode is going to be part 2 of what will actually be a 3-part series with Sean Bhardwaj from Breakthrough Growth Partners. We originally anticipated it being a 2-part series, but we just had so much good stuff to chat with him about that we will actually turn it into 3 parts. And just as a reminder, my normal housekeeping, you can find us on social media. We are at early_adopter, and remember, no E in the adopter, on LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. And make sure to follow and review the pod on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really, really does help us from a discoverability perspective and stuff. So please do that. We will love you forever.
And it's been so lovely having Sean on. I've really enjoyed our conversations. If we can twist his arm to get him on more and more, we absolutely will. Just such a nice kind of combination between all of us, and we're working on really great and simpatico things in this space. So really happy to have him on.
100%.
But today, Sean is going to dive into the real reasons why AI initiatives fail. And spoiler alert, it's not because the technology doesn't work. But without further ado, let's jump into the second part of our episode with Sean.
Sounds great.
All right. If you missed part 1 with Sean, I definitely go back and listen. A lot of good stuff there. This is our part 2. So part 1, we covered why AI adoption is happening so fast and what makes this different from other tech shifts. Also, something I think we're going to continue to dive into a little more as we go along, but secretly, your team might be using AI way more than you realize.
And then, of course, Sean introduced us to the concept of proficiency before efficiency. Try saying that 3 times fast.
But I absolutely loved that. I think that's so good. And obviously, that's been getting a lot of love on social. So more to dive in there. And then I especially love the tennis analogy. Big tennis fan over here too, Sean.
So welcome back, Sean. Tell us a little bit about yourself again for anyone who missed the first episode that we did with you.
Thanks, Jess. Glad to be back. I'm Sean Bhardwaj, managing partner at Breakthrough Growth Partners, where we help organizations and communities embrace innovation and grow into the future, especially when it comes to AI and emerging technologies. I'm really glad to be here and talk shop.
So when we last spoke, you left us with a little bit of a cliffhanger, and you said that most AI initiatives fail not because the technology doesn't work, but because organizations aren't set up to use it well. And, I have to ask, what does not set up well actually look like?
Yeah, and I'm particularly curious about this as well, because everything we read about and everything we see is all about the success stories. But very rarely do people want to talk about all the failures and things going on behind the scenes. So tell us about this other side to the story.
It's really funny because a lot of times people think about innovation and adopting new technologies, and they get really hyped up, and everyone just focuses on what you can do, as opposed to what happens if you do and what happens if what you do doesn't work, right? And so it's wonderful to have that optimism for the initial excitement. But over and over again, I see continuous mistakes and very specific mistakes that cause these adoption efforts to fail. So let's use an example. Let's say a business gets really excited about AI and they sign up for some generative AI tools and they try a few things. A lot of times what's happened, you'll see the data over the last couple of years, they seem to do the survey every few months, but they're like 90% of pilots fail, like 80% of pilots are failing and they don't get out of the pilot stage into production. And so the numbers are really high with high failure rates. For those of us in innovation and technology, it's like, well, you're doing an experiment that's, 20% success rate is not bad. But that doesn't work for most businesses because most businesses don't have the time, the resources, or the energy to just be experimenting, right? Like you put something into your business, you want to give it and yourself the best chance of success. So I see this across industries, whether it's startups or whether it's government, a nonprofits, healthcare, anything, you name it. And these pitfalls happen not because the technology doesn't work, but because the organization isn't set up well and there are consistent patterns. And it's the same like 5 categories of pitfalls and really a combination of them that I see over and over again. So the first one is the most common one, right? And this is the whole ready, fire, aim syndrome that organizations fall into. And so AI gets brought in and there's not really a clear connection to actual business outcomes. Going back to the analogy we had last time, right? It's the AI touch a truck. Everyone's excited to do something with it, but they don't know what success looks like for their business. And the reasons for this can be, myriad, right? Like you can have a team that's adopting AI, but they don't maybe have the technical expertise, or maybe they do have the technical expertise, but they haven't been able to tie that back to business goals in other business units because they just don't have the domain knowledge and they don't have the systems in place and the product management and really the communication and the language to talk about it in a way that everyone can understand and participate and say, here's how I'm going to use it. And here's how it makes sense for me in my business, in my team, in my function, and then for me individually, and then for my particular place. An example of this, and I'm going to try to use examples without like naming names to throw no one under the bus because we're all still learning here. But you have a lot of like solo entrepreneurs and folks in the content business and in consulting where you're doing coaching or individual consulting as a solopreneur. And so seen a case where, coaching business says, oh, like I need to have a lot of touch points with my client and build my email list. So let me subscribe to a AI newsletter generator. And what it's going to do is just pull a bunch of content, put it together in a newsletter and fire it out. That seems like a wonderful idea to automate your marketing. But what happens is that the output is very generic and sometimes inaccurate. It doesn't line up with your specific voice. It doesn't have your unique insights. And so it didn't help them attract the clients that they actually cared about and actually caused disengagement and unsubscribing from the list than even when they were less productive. So what was the result of that? There was a lot of activity, but no real value because there wasn't a concerted effort put into thinking about what moves the needle in my business and what AI tools will actually help on those specific fronts.
First off, touch a truck is going to be on a t-shirt. So Sean, don't worry. That's going to be in the mail soon. But that coaching business example really hits close to home for me. I feel like I've seen that exact scenario play out quite a bit. someone gets really excited about a tool because it seems helpful. And I think we encounter lots of these tools, talking about how they're going to increase productivity. But there's no real connection to what they're actually trying to achieve. So it's like buying, this is my analogy, because, I love analogies. It's like buying a really expensive hammer, but what you actually need is a screwdriver.
I absolutely know people that have done this as well. And I think it really happens because we get caught up in the doing something with AI mentality instead of asking what business problems are we solving. So they're kind of thinking about it in a backwards way rather than actually putting the effort in.
Yeah, absolutely. And to extend that analogy, it's I am not the most handy of people in a physical way, but I'm trying to learn. I dabble in fixing things. And a lot of times it's like, you buy a toolkit or you buy a drill, or you buy like this very sophisticated equipment that in the hands of an expert, very useful, high utility. But for someone like me who doesn't know what he's doing or uses it once at a time, there's not a lot of value to it, right? So first you have to think about what are you actually trying to do? Because if you bought a drill, but you're trying to like change the faucet in your tub, like those two things are not useful. They're not congruent. It doesn't make sense. So you have to really start with the why.
And then you end up causing so much more damage than you initially anticipated.
And instead of you have few problems.
You've got bigger problems.
I actually want to keep going in this analogy because this is such a wonderful analogy. And we should use this more and more because when, I try to be handy myself, Sean, it's an ever evolving landscape. What I find is I end up going back to, Home Depot or the hardware store time and time again, trying to get the right tool. You go and you get a tool, you bring it home, you're like, shoot, it's the wrong size, or, oh no, I need X, Y, and Z thing, or it's not quite the right fit. You go back to the hardware store and you have to try to get something else. That I think is such a fitting analogy for AI. There's so much about back and forth, this research bit you have to really do to make sure you're using it the right way. And
then you end up spending a fortune because you've had to go back and thing each time.
And so to bring it all home, if you just plan a little bit better and you know what you're looking for the first time, you're going to be it's going to be a lot more successful. But Sean, why don't you take us through the next pitfall for us?
Can I add one little plug to that one as well to extend the analogy even further, right? Like the lesson that I learned is it is wonderful for me to be able to research the tools and research the things and watch a YouTube video and then think I can do something. But understanding my limitations has been the most helpful thing, right? And now what I do is I ask the experts. Like I have my plumber, I have my handyman. I say, hey, I have this thing. Is this something that I should ask you to come out and do? Or is this like, no, seriously, it's a 30-minute, like go unscrew this, plug this in. Like it would take them, the expert, like 30 minutes. It'll take me like an hour. But I'm like, that is an acceptable trade-off. Whereas if I text them and they're like, yeah, that's going to take like me a few hours to do. I'm like, well, I'm probably just going to break something. Like I should not go there. And so that's where I think trusting the people who know, right? Like resources like this podcast and working with experts, if you don't have to be the expert in every area. I think that's also some of the things that people get caught up in. It's like, well, we're working within the surface area of what we know, or I'm guilty of this a lot. Like our ambition exceeds our ability. And it's like, well, that's okay. Other people have abilities and you can bring them in. You don't have to be good and great at everything, but you have to know where your limits are. Okay, so the next pitfall, and this is sort of interesting. It's actually weak leadership support, right? So you may have this manifest in a lot of different ways. The team might be excited, but the leadership doesn't really care about it, or they may care or say they care, but they don't allocate the time, the resources, visibly supports the adoption of the tool. And that makes it completely not stick. Seen this in multiple areas, and sort of interesting because, on the one hand, we have the whole AI touch a truck, everyone wants to be a part of it, but do they really want to be a part of it? And do they really understand what being a part of the AI initiative or product looks like? And so, one example is like a city's public works team wanted to pilot an AI-powered work order system to make it easier. There's less stuff to fill out, and they can just kind of take verbal notes. It's promising. It's like a great tool. It works well in demos, but no one in the leadership team in that group, right, in the public works team, makes it a priority. So the training doesn't happen. And then within a few weeks, people just default back to like doing the paper forms and just sending stuff over email. And so that is a like classic example of, well, we wanted to do a thing, we thought it was good, everything was working fine with technology, but we did not allocate those time and those resources to make sure that people could actually understand what to do.
This one is huge. I've seen this pattern happen a lot, and not just with AI, with other, implementations of new tools. And actually, I would say it's not just a leadership thing as well. It's a whole team thing, because you will very often have the champion who's like pushing through the new tool or the new technology or the AI or whatever it is. And the rest of the team is like, yeah, it sounds cool. But then they don't really take the time to get to know it and to get to use it or to do the training. And so it's kind of coming from the top and the bottom, because if the team's not learning or taking the time to use it, then they're never going to use it. And then it's an immediate fail. So I think it kind of it can come from both angles. It can definitely come from leadership, but it can also come from the rest of the people on your team as well.
So that norming that you mentioned is so important, both for leaders and for teams, right? So again, another use case where there was a generative AI rollout to large organization, everyone had access to the tool in their hands. And then, which is phenomenal, great, you've embraced it, we want to figure it all out, and there was the culture of learning. But what happened is the line staff that was using it and the employees asked their managers how they were using it, and it was crickets. And so there were goals for the leaders, right, and the teams to measure how much is your team using it, but the managers themselves did not adopt it. And so they couldn't say, oh, here's what I did. I used it in this way this week. It worked for me. It didn't work for me. But having that conversation of normalizing the use is absolutely so important for whether you're the team that's the champion, whether you're the leader that's the champion, whether you're the individual, just to make it comfortable for everyone around you and visible that this is something we are doing.
I think that's such an important addition to this piece. You can't expect your team to adopt something you won't even try yourself. You have to. I know there's a lot of different leadership styles, but I think around AI tools, leadership by example is a really important one. There's so much hype around AI that the testing period will probably last longer than normal. You'll get people to try things maybe a little bit longer than normal. But if you don't find real value for it, you as the leader don't find real value from it, I think it's just going to go the way of other forgotten tools.
And I think the other problem is, like, it's hard to get people to adopt new tools or new technologies. Like, people are really busy. They don't have the time. Like, sometimes trying to get them to shift over from, one spreadsheet to another is a nightmare, because they're just trying to get their day-to-day done. And then to add learning something new on top of it adds a whole nother level of like, oh, it's just something that they don't want to do. But I think, again, that's where the good leadership comes from, and and the examples, like, hey, you can do this great thing. This great thing is going to really save you the time. Once they get that, then they're much more open to it. But otherwise, you're just throwing another burden on their plate when they're already overworked and they don't have the time. If you just keep loading more and more stuff on it without showing them the benefits, then they are really not going to adopt the new technology. Like, it's the last thing that they're going to want to do.
Well, if I'm learning anything from Sean and all of this, is that, we're talking about AI, but there's core principles here, right? And I think this speaks to a core principle around change management. So you have to really, lead the organization through. Although I will say that probably opens up a whole, can of worms on that one. This next pitfall, though, I'm very excited about, because this is where I start to geek out. So, Sean, why don't you take us through this next one?
Yeah, Kyle, you're going to love this. And let me channel all of the sentiment of all of my data science, computer science, engineering friends from it, speak for them. But the poor data and technical foundations and technical debt is the biggest, like, physical, or maybe not physical, but like tangible impediment to successfully rolling out AI in your organization. Whether we're talking about generative AI, whether we're talking about machine learning or other forms of it, the AI is only as good as the data you feed it and the systems it lives in. I've got far too many examples here, right? But most organizations have not invested in what I will call the plumbing, the very unsexy, like, servers, physical servers, cloud servers, what data environments are things in. Most organizations have spent like no time, and Kyle, I'm leaning on you. You probably know this far better than I do, cleaning up their data. And let's make that a little bit more concrete, right? Like, everyone's like, oh, cleaning up data, it's so esoteric. It's as simple as if you've ever looked at two Excel sheets, right? Like, let's say you're in marketing and you want to reach out to people. And so you've got a partner that has a list of people they want to invite, and you've got your main master list and your registration list. You put all those three things together, what invariably happens? You're going to have duplicates, but it's not simple duplicates. It's like one person's name and last name are put together. One person has name, middle initial, last name, but it's the same person, different emails, different things. So like when you think about data and you think about comparing different data sets, you can see very immediately as a human how that would be very confusing and very long to sort through. For an AI that does not have human context, it's even worse, right? And so let's like make that tangible. So what does that mean, right? So we've got to clean up our data, but if we don't, you can have really weird things happen. So another example of an e-commerce brand wanted to plug in a personalization engine into its store and say, let's take all the wonderful data that we have from our potential customers and the people who visit our websites, thanks to all the third-party cookies and wonderful data brokers who are out there doing so useful things for businesses and brands. But we take that information and try and make it somewhat valuable, right, for the customer, and say, well, what if we could personalize and offer you a specific sale on a specific product that you would actually want and need around this time of year? That's phenomenal. But if their customer data was messy, they had duplicate records, and they actually had bad product tags in the back end. So they ended up doing some hilarious things, like recommending, women's bathing suits to a person who was man shopping for boots. Like, there was just very interesting discrepancies that we saw. And so what should have been like a really helpful tool actually became a liability because it was just very confusing, and not to mention expensive, right? For A, just having a tool and implementing it, and then B, the erroneous ad spend as a result of that.
Sean, this is my nightmare scenario. You are 100% preaching to the choir. And I think the old adage of, garbage in, garbage out is incredibly important to remember here. So, bad data in, bad AI out. And what eventually that results in is you have an AI tool that's supposed to be helpful, but if it's working with bad data or messy data, it's actually making things worse. Now, messy data, like you had a couple good examples there around duplicate data. But messy data can come in a lot of different forms, incomplete information, right? So then you could potentially have hallucinations. The AI is trying to make up and fill in those gaps, which we don't want. You can have the duplication, which might give more importance to some of those duplicate records and downplay some of the more important ones. Or you may just have siloed information. So you've got a bunch of different siloed pieces of data around this customer. So maybe you have their interactions with, in the e-commerce one, you have interactions on your website, you have their purchases on one side. And on the other side, maybe you have like their returns and a lot of additional context. And then maybe you have some survey information. If none of that's talking together, or some of it's talking together and not others, you're creating this huge kind of array of jumbled information. And the AI is going to spit out data or spit out responses and output that can't, recognizing or kind of translating from all of that. And it's going to basically give you really bad output. And I think this is where, Sean, you mentioned a lot of the pilots fail to get into production. And I think what's really happening behind the scenes is because this data foundation is so poor. And so we don't get from the pilot into production because all those edge cases that start to pop up where the AI is failing is because the data is not there. It was really great on that little bit of subset of data that you had where like everything was perfect and all the data was filled in and everything was matching to each other. But when you start getting into production and your data is not clean, now it's just going to start throwing out erroneous errors. So again, I can geek out on this forever. Sean, I love that you brought this one up. I think it's so important and it's hard to sometimes diagnose. So you really do need to pay attention to what your data foundation is behind the scenes. And, and only if you do that will you start to see good results on the back.
So an analogy I have for that, right, is mise en place. So for those who like nerd about cooking a little bit, and for those who share a kitchen and cook with people with different styles, or maybe this is you'll feel seen in one way or another. But I've had to share kitchens with people where, a lot of times they're just like cooking and they take stuff out of the fridge and everything's all over the counter and, like the food's over here and the cutting board's over there and the knife's over there and then stuff gets moved and it's just like a complete mess. But when you look at like a professional kitchen or someone who's a chef, or heck, even someone who's like cooking on YouTube, or if you go to
or you watch
class,
The Bear, if you watch The Bear,
or you watch
Love
if
that
you
show.
watch any food related content that is meant for other people to consume, like, visually, not the product, you'll see this concept of like mise en place, where it's like a place for everything and everything in its place, right? So when you're making one thing in your own kitchen, sure, like you do you. But if you're cooking in like a restaurant, or if you're cooking for someone else to see it and to understand it, or to teach them a recipe, you need to dice everything in the same shapes. They need to be in the bowls, in everything ready to go, so that the person using them just has to follow the steps, and they're going to get a consistently replicable outcome that works for them, right? And so that's where I think so many companies have not invested in this area, don't understand the value of this area, and now the bill is coming due, because we didn't do this with software. We're just like, just okay, we'll get to it later, because it doesn't immediately produce that upfront value, right? So focused on efficiency in the short term that they're like, we cooked one dish. All right, the app's out. Let's move out. The website made the update. Great. Let's move to the next thing. Now the bill has come due, because we need to now do personalization at scale. Oh, are you ready to cook a bespoke meal for 100, 1,000, 1,000,000 people? No, you're probably not, right? Until you put in the time and money to clean that up. And so this is where, again, that short-term focus on efficiency is going to nip you in the butt when you really understand the need for quality.
Yeah. So I was just talking about this the other day. I did a workshop about AI, and we spent quite a bit of time on data hygiene, because I'm going to give a shout out to my friend Eric Callahan. He and I had many, many conversations about data hygiene. And this is something I think that you see at all levels of business. It's not just a small business or a startup thing. Like, I have seen it at major multinational corporations. There was one project I worked on where people would misspell something when they were entering it in the data entry process, and everything was fine and everything would work until it got to the poor data analyst at the end of the situation, and she was having to spend 10 plus hours a week manually cleaning the data. And it wasn't that anyone was doing it maliciously, like no one was doing it intentionally. They would just misspell, or they would like leave in an extra space or whatever, but it didn't affect their kind of day to day. So no one really picked up on it until the poor analyst at the end of the process was having to spend forever just manually cleaning stuff. So once we fixed that problem, this woman's life was so much easier. But it doesn't seem like it's that big of a thing, like on the surface. But as we, as we've just been talking about, actually, it's like the foundation of everything to do with AI, and it makes your life so much more difficult if you don't have clean quality data.
Yeah, I think we could do a whole episode on getting your data ready for
I think
AI.
we probably should. We probably should do a whole episode on getting your data ready. I'll bring Eric in on that one.
And actually, I'm doing a webinar next week that's all about this as well. So I can talk about this ad nauseum. But to bring it back here, I think, Sean, what you talk about, that proficiency before efficiency, something we've talked a lot about, this context and this data. I think it might be really easy for the audience to say, well, okay, fine. I'm just going to use the really easy, AI tools. I'm not going to worry about getting my data clean, because, I can still do a lot without it. If you really want to get to that proficiency level, that next step in your AI journey, that's where you do need to start bringing the context in. We talk about context all the time, how important it is. That's going to help you get to that next level. So you do need to start building some of those data foundations.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, it's honestly money and time well spent. And I think the challenge a lot of times is explaining to executives and leaders who aren't technical and aren't in the weeds, or maybe they haven't been technical in a while, right? Like the real need for this plumbing. Because now it's like you can make an argument that every business is a technology business, because we're so reliant on digital tools and infrastructure. So, and that's also why like this whole AI thing is very foundational and catalytic, because we've made the pivot to like, you're a plumber, fantastic. How am I going to find out about you? Oh, your Yelp site, your website. I'm going to do reviews for you. You're going to do your work orders for me. You're going to take my payment on your phone. Like all of those things mean that the digital infrastructure is in place. So we need to invest there. We need to come back around. I've had many a talk off the ledge conversation with, head of engineering and the head of the IT infrastructure stack, where they're like, for 10 years, I've been barking up this tree. But doing that, I think we then love the idea of an episode on getting data ready for AI. We can't understate how important this is. Another pitfall, though, as teams get further along, is ethics and compliance gaps. Right? We're obviously big proponents of AI and the value it can create, but shadow AI is one thing. But even if organizations are a little more sophisticated, there's a danger of using AI without clear rules, without testing, without oversight, without understanding what you're doing with it, technically, as well as policy-wise. This is super dangerous in customer-facing decision-making roles. We had an example last week that demonstrated that. Another one that I have, and this is, so we think about AI in like sensitive areas, finance, healthcare, like a credit union starts using maybe a lower cost AI tool that helps them with like credit scoring and evaluating candidates for loans and for different like financial products. What can happen, and in certain instances has, is the tool starts to think about the shortcut of like, well, okay, I can look at all these different factors, but I notice that in certain zip codes, the applicants tend to not be eligible. So I'm just going to take these applicants in certain zip codes and just downgrade them and say like, automatically, no, that is not a fit, which is really interesting. But what that does is, as you can think about it, is like, it's essentially bias and discrimination, right? And it opens the door to regulatory, reputational damage, inaccuracy. Like there's a whole host of problems with that. This is like, the financial problem is pretty substantial, but you think about this in like scoring for like insurance rates. You think about this in scoring for like where health needs are and where funding goes. There's a lot of like dangers around this. This is one of the areas that I personally try to pay a lot of attention to as these tools are being developed is how do we make sure and what's the level of transparency we can have around what are the guidelines, right? Like what are the real choices we're trying to make and where's the tool maybe taking shortcuts that on paper make sense, but don't in practice.
Yeah, the credit union example is terrifying. We talked about the bias issue around our, AI ethics a few weeks ago. And I think it's important to note that, if bias is in the training data or, it starts to find bias in the actual, actual data, that AI is going to amplify a lot of those issues. And so without the proper guidelines in place, you're going to get pretty far down the road before you realize that something's happening and you got a real issue. I think a lot of small businesses are going to get tripped up in this. We talk about how, AI is democratizing a lot of the large enterprise tools and giving those to small business. But so now small businesses probably need to start thinking, about a lot of these issues, that they're not just big company problems. Now that you have access to a lot of these enterprise level tools, you have to start thinking about the enterprise level challenges as well. The bar is going to be higher these days. And I mean, I know this from, all of my startup experience. You're expected to have SOC compliance, to be GDPR and CCPA compliant when, typically a lot of those compliance frameworks were only applicable to large enterprises. So, and there's a lot of tools out there to help you with that, but you have to recognize that the bar is going to be higher.
But, it's not just about regulations. Like obviously you have to adhere to privacy regulations and AI regulations that are going to be coming into effect. But, even if something is technically legal, if your AI is making biased decisions, there's a brand and reputational issues. In the ethics episode a couple of weeks ago, we talked about that Amazon recruiting tool. And this is, a couple of years old at this point. But basically, as a reminder, Amazon's computer models were trained to vet applicants by observing patterns in resumes that were submitted to the company over a 10-year period. But the problem is, in tech, most resumes come from men. So the system taught itself that male candidates were preferable. Highly arguable, but anyway. And it actually penalized resumes that included the word women or women's in it. So like a women's chess club captain would have been filtered by this AI recruiting tool. And in the end, they scrapped it. They scrapped the whole thing that they had spent years and millions of dollars building because it was so heavily biased. So obviously that's not just a reputational issue. Like that was a big news story at the time, but also they wasted, I mean, it's Amazon, so, for them it's pocket change, but they wasted a ton of money and effort and resource building that incredibly biased tool. So it's a real problem.
Yeah. And I think it's important to state though, like these are solvable problems, right? Like the the outcome I don't want people to take away is like, well, AI is clearly risky. It's going to get it wrong and make these big mistakes. Therefore, we shouldn't use it. The point is how you use it, right? So like if you have a team that's focused on responsible use of AI, if you have a common language between your teams, right? Between the finance team and the analysts and the technical team that's developing it, where they can say, hey, we're noticing these things. Let's have some oversight. Let's test these results. Let's continuously monitor them. And if we see trends, let's have that conversation between us to say, is this something the tool is doing? Is this something we're doing? Do we need to always have AI oversight? And like the tool shrinks it here, but we can't completely automate yet. Like all of these are solvable problems if you know that they exist. So, and there's still value to be had, plenty of value in using AI, but we need to do it with the right governance, right? And so that I think is the takeaway. It's not that you can't or shouldn't, or that it's always going to be bad. It's that you really have to engage with it and hold its hand until it actually is ready to do what you're asking it to do. That whole MBA intern analogy, right? You got to train it.
Absolutely.
So Sean, what's our next pitfall?
Well, speaking of training, the last, but definitely not least, the most common one is probably a theme that folks have noticed in the first four, right? Underdeveloped skills and culture. Like the biggest problem, and Jess, you've alluded to this and given examples, and it's 100% true. Teams don't know how to use AI, or they don't trust it. So it goes and user gets used badly, right? And so even well-meaning and well-intended organizations don't have the muscle of like learning and development. Like every learning and development department in even large organizations has like gotten shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. And they're, using tools and providing things, but there rarely is a systemic, like personal development plan for each person, whether it's a team or an individual or a manager or a frontline employee, to say, how are we going to improve their proficiency? So that's just not a muscle that exists. And then you add the layer of like, well, now we're introducing a new technical tool, which is a completely different skill set. And now we need people to think about their workflow, which is a completely different skill set. So what happens when we don't appropriately train and invest and give the time and create that culture? You can have cases like a nonprofit that wants to use AI to segment their donors more effectively, and therefore they can be more targeted and personalized how they reach out to them. But no one really explains how to use the dashboard, interpret the data, or incorporate into their outreach. And so what happens is that, like water finds its lowest point, like effort finds the easiest way to flow out. And so the fundraisers just go back to mass email blasts because it's too complicated and too cognitively tasking. It's like, well, in the time I took to figure this thing out and send one customized email, I could have emailed and called 10 people. Why am I going to do this? Yeah. Right. Again, getting over that initial efficiency hump to get proficiency is critical, because without that training and the confidence, even the best tools just sit on the shelf.
Yeah, this is something I've seen a lot when a team gets a new tool. And we talked about it earlier, but like they don't know how to use it, and the old systems are easier because even if they're not necessarily better, you already know how to use them and you don't have to take the time to learn how to use them. And so you just keep going back to the old systems. But they can see the benefit of the tool. They just don't have the time to sit down and do it. It's that time and effort thing again. But without the training and the confidence piece, it's just going to sit there and they will have spent a lot of money on this tool that no one's actually using. But Sean, how can you build that confidence without overwhelming people?
Yeah. To underscore, even further, I think to build that confidence, first we have to understand a lot of times from a development and product perspective, there's this assumption that if the thing I've created is better than what you're currently doing, that everyone will be like, yes, I want that new, better thing. And I have, seen this time and time throughout my career, like very early on, again, like a different example, but I was doing some research on computer assisted dispatch, right? So when you call 911, your call gets routed to a call center that then is tied into the different emergency services in a particular area. And so we're doing research and saying, like, what are the systems they use? And this is, again, like 15 years ago. So I hope funding has gone here and we've changed it. But the systems were completely disconnected. Like everyone has their own software vendor and their own homebrew system. And a lot of times the systems they were using, and this isn't like 2010, were like command line, Microsoft DOS, like very much old school systems. And so I was interviewing these folks and saying, like, this is 2010. We can give you a wonderful graphical user interface, right? Like, so instead of you typing like /command, like fire truck, this thing like that, and 7 strings. Like I can give you a button, and you push the button, it's got a picture of a fire truck, and then you pulled up all the fire trucks in their location. Now you can assign it. To a person looked at like 10 different places. Every single one of them said, no, we do not want a new tool. And the organization didn't want it because they already invested all this money in their own homebrew mishmash of systems. Migrating was going to be a huge expense. So first we got to get the dollars for it. But then the end users didn't even want it because they're like, I've been doing this for 20 years. I don't want to learn a new, like, I have to like dispatch and do these things. You want me to learn a whole new system and way of doing it. So even though I can verifiably prove that it is simpler and easier and more effective and more future-proof, that is not enough. We have to build in the time and the resources to make that change, to allow for that training. Otherwise, it's just not going to work, right? And so it's not exactly an AI example, but it's consistent throughout any type of change management.
It's any type of tool, right? It doesn't matter if it's an AI tool or a non-AI tool, but everyone has to be comfortable and familiar working with it. Okay, so Sean, now that we've kind of covered all of the major pitfalls, if I'm a business owner and my team is really excited about AI, which, yay, great, this is exciting. How do I know if we are about to walk into one of these pitfalls?
I would say you would label them. So now you know what to look out for. You can be on the lookout for it. But to take it to the next level, I think it's not just the one pitfall you got to worry about, right? It's multiples, because they're not isolated and they compound on each other. Because if you don't have if you don't have alignment, right, and your goals are not properly connected to the technology, you're not going to get the performance you need. You're going to get skepticism as a result of that low performance. And then when you have that skepticism, people aren't going to be supporting the next tool or the next iteration, or the next step you try to take. Because again, change is like a high cognitive load activity. And that cycle repeats until someone pulls the plug and says like, well, the AI just doesn't work here. So not only, you get a failed pilot, but you can actually get a more resistant culture the next time you try to make the change and adopt a tool. So I would say, don't be on the lookout for one, be on the lookout for a system and how these things may be influencing each other. And then that's also part of the solution, right? So if we ask in reverse and say, well, how do we unwind this? Pick the one that you think is going to have the most leverage and unwind that, and then work your way through. And you'll be able to, have a positive spiral instead of a negative one.
So it's not really just one thing going wrong. It's like a cascade effect. And then once you've had a failed AI pilot, it's probably harder to get people excited about trying again.
And then you've created this organizational scar tissue around AI adoption. And that's a really important point about why getting it right the first time matters so much, and putting the proper kind of planning and strategy in place. So it's really important to put the policy and strategy in place, not just as compliance checkboxes, but as infrastructure for success. I think you can avoid all of these pitfalls with a clear business goal, active leadership support, clean data and intentional technology, ethical guardrails, and practical training.
So that is a really helpful framework, but I'm curious, for business owners or for businesses that don't have a dedicated IT person or an IT team or compliance officers, because honestly, that's probably going to be most of the businesses that are in our audience. How do you actually implement these guardrails without creating more bureaucracy that just slows everything down?
Yeah, I think one of the simplest ways to start building that structure, especially for small businesses, is by creating a clear, lightweight AI policy, not like the boring, 90-page legal document kind, but the kind that helps your team move faster and safer. So like a minimum viable AI policy. So we can get into that.
Sean, you painted a pretty clear picture of how things go wrong. I'm curious, when you work with a business that's already fallen into several of these pitfalls, how do you rebuild that trust and momentum? Like once people have been burned by a failed AI initiative, how do you get them to try it again?
Yeah, I think honestly, it's a great opportunity, right? And it's a great opportunity to come together and acknowledge what's happened before. I think that, the culture of leadership of yesteryear, and I'll call it yesteryear, but it's still very prevalent, is to withhold information, right? And there's like a risk package to that where it's if something goes wrong, we don't want to really talk about it. We want to air out the grievances. And like, we just want to move on to the next thing and like not talk about what happened before. But everyone's talking about it. Everyone knows, right? Everyone has opinions and ideas and beliefs. And so once you've kind of lost that, or if something has gone wrong and people have opinions and ideas about what it is, getting those folks together and saying like, well, let's have an honest conversation about what didn't work. And then you can really understand what you need to target there. But then very quickly you pivot to, well, why are we trying to do this again? And I think putting that context out there of we as an organization are committed to doing things in a better way. We as an organization are committed to trying things, failing at things, learning from those failures, and improving what we do, because that is just how we operate. And like, this is one domain in which it's manifesting itself. That I think goes a long way. And like, we're all adults in the room. Like most people are willing to give things a go. But what they're not willing to do is just go along with something that they're like, I've ridden this ride before. I've seen it. We're not talking about it. We're probably going to end up doing the same thing again. But just through transparency, you can convert a lot of those maybe skeptics into champions.
So this might be a tough question, but do you think that there are some companies that just aren't ready for AI right now? And like, how do you know when you're ready versus when you're just setting yourself up for these pitfalls?
What a great question. Yes, I think, again, there's that like ready, fire, aim and the hype. And it's like, oh, we got to do it. We got to do it now. We got to put in everything. And I think there's this like, using a cooking analogy again, like people like AI is like salt, right? They just got to throw more salt on it, throw AI into it. It's going to be awesome. And again, it comes to that like transparency and real talk. So when I work with organizations, I talk to them, I was like, let's talk about why we're really doing AI. And if the answer like in our heart of hearts is because it makes us more appealing to investors, because it juices our stock price, because everyone else is doing it, because we think it's a way to like cut staff, because what have you, right? Like if we get to the real heart of the matter, we can say, well, let's talk about what the actual goal is and bring it back to those business goals. And if the goal is we think we need to run more leanly, AI is one tool in an entire suite of tools and options and opportunities that you have. So just doing it via this one way doesn't make you more effective. And the same thing, if it's like, well, we want to, be the flavor of the month, then like one of two things, either maybe don't, and figure out something that will actually create value in your business, right? And have sustainable growth, or but do it in a light touch way that like doesn't affect your core operations. So you get your sticker that you can put on that, we use AI here, but you're not disrupting your business in a negative way and creating these negative externalities for future uses. So I think it's important to be very truthful. And that being said, like just because you don't want to adopt it enterprise-wide does not mean that you can't encourage the use of tools with the right policies and guardrails in place at like a team level or an individual level. So there doesn't have to be a one size fits all and it's either binary, we're doing AI or we're not doing AI. Like there's different shades, there's different levels. You can step into it, dip your toe in the water, and approach it in different ways. So yeah, if you're not ready for it, I would say the businesses that spend the time working on the pitfalls first and then doing the technology have so much more success than those who just like jump into the technology and then try to correct all the problems along the way for a whole host of reasons.
I love that. That's really, really smart.
I hear the, let's use AI for this constantly. And I think a lot of that comes from the hype and the pressure that businesses are feeling to be, part of, this curve and start to adopting some of this bit, especially if you're hearing it from your board or your shareholders.
Well, you just heard it from Sean. I think that was such a great kind of summary on the pitfalls. Let's dive into AI news now that actually matters for your business. And as always, there is a ton of news this week, Jess.
Every week we think it's going to quiet down and it never actually does. So this week, OpenAI has just launched their first agent. They're calling it ChatGPT Agent, which is, hugely original. And we're going to do a deep dive into that next week because that's actually going to be quite a big thing. But just in general, this is a really, really big piece of news for our audience.
Yeah, ChatGPT now thinks and acts, proactively choosing from a toolbox of agent skills to complete tasks for you. It can now do work for you using kind of its own computer, if you will. It's still in the cloud, but it's, kind of for you, right? And it'll handle complex tasks from start to finish. So it can ask you to analyze competitors and create slide decks, plan and buy ingredients for specific meals, book travel for you, or brief you on upcoming client meetings. It's really kind of starting to move up that agentic or, towards that agentic ladder of autonomy that we always talk about.
Absolutely. So this is essentially the evolution from AI as an assistant to AI as an employee. So instead of just asking ChatGPT how to do something, you can basically just ask it to do it for you. So for our audience who's always juggling a million tasks, this could really be a game changer.
What's smart about this is you're always in control, though. So ChatGPT requests permission before taking actions, which should reduce the consequences. And you can easily interrupt or take over the browser or stop a task at any point. So if you see it kind of going off the rails, I think this is, this human oversight.
Yeah.
They've built in that ChatGPT can have that oversight component, which we think is really smart. They've learned from some of the early agent limitations we talked about a few weeks ago, on our agent episode.
Exactly. And so this is going to be available to Pro, Plus, and Team users for right now. And a full break week because there is going to be a lot that goes into this. But the really key thing for business owners is that the line between AI tool and AI teammate is starting to blur even more than it perhaps did before.
And just like we talk about, enterprise level tools being available to, smaller businesses, entrepreneurs, I think what this shows kind of an addition to that or a continuation of that. This is really about accessibility. So you're going to have access to pretty complex tools that would be typically in the past very difficult to access. Now you kind of have it at your fingertips.
Difficult and expensive.
So next up, difficult and expensive, yes, especially from a implementation, build, setup, all of that, right? So now it's really easy.
Yep.
Next up, Mistral AI, which is another one of the kind of big, AI LLM tools that we've talked about in the past. They dropped some major updates to LeChat that puts them in direct competition with the big players. So if you're looking for an alternative LLM, like an alternative to, let's say, ChatGPT or Claude or something like that, especially if you're based in Europe, as you might be able to tell from LeChat, it's French, and you're concerned about some of the EU AI Act guidelines, which we've covered in prior episodes, this could be a really interesting option for you.
Yeah, so they've just added a deep research mode, voice mode, advanced image editing mode, all of those things that you see in a ChatGPT or in a Claude, just in this new LeChat format. So Mistral is really positioning this as an enterprise-friendly alternative. Companies can use LeChat's deep reasoning and other capabilities to analyze their own internal data without having to upload anything to the cloud, which is really good from a privacy and data perspective. So I think given this most recent announcement, I think we'll probably do a little bit of a deep dive into Mistral as well, because we've kind of talked about it briefly in the past, but we've not looked at it in depth as much as we have some of the other ones. So I think that will be in a future episode as well.
Absolutely. And I think one thing just to kind of note, we're seeing a lot of kind of similarities between the tools. So all of the tools are starting to have deep research modes, which again is a type of agent.
So next, we've got Perplexity has launched their own AI browser called Comet. This is part of a bigger trend that we're starting to see. AI companies aren't just making better chatbots, but they're kind of reimagining how we interact with the web entirely. We're expecting ChatGPT to launch their own browser in the very near future as well. So it's not just a standalone Perplexity thing.
Yeah, so a lot of these companies are just starting to kind of go further and further down kind of that chain of what you can and can't do and take over more of the white space. I'm hearing really incredible things about Comet. We haven't used it yet, but by the next time we talk about this, maybe do a deep dive, we will. But yeah, to Jess's point, I think it really starts to change how we do things. We're not just putting AI on top of the tools we already know. It's now starting to fundamentally shift how we interact with AI. The headline feature of Comet is Perplexity's AI search engine, which is pre-installed and set as the default, kind of putting the company's core product of AI generated summaries of search results front and center. But it also includes Comet Assistant, which can automate routine tasks like summarizing emails and managing tabs, which could be a real game changer.
Or if you have 1,000 tabs open at any moment in time like I do, that will absolutely change my life. Currently, it's only available to Perplexity's $200 a month max subscribers, so it really puts it out of reach for most general businesses right now. But the bigger story is that really this is where browsing is headed. So instead of clicking through, 10 websites to research something, you'll just have a conversation with your browser about what you need to know. We've talked a little bit about this and about AI optimized search, which is really where search is going. We'll definitely do an episode on AI optimized search because that's going to be incredibly important going forward.
I think it's a fundamental shift that is coming for all businesses.
100%. Yeah.
And so, we as an audience need to get ready for that.
Absolutely.
Okay. Time for our AI gone wrong segment. And this week we have a hilarious follow-up to our Atari chess story from a few weeks ago.
So this is really brilliant. So to remind you, our original story from a couple of weeks ago was that ChatGPT was put up against an Atari from 1977 in a chess match, and it got absolutely demolished. And apparently the LLMs have been talking amongst themselves. Not really, but we'll say that. The word has gotten around to all of the other AI.
Yeah, so Robert Caruso, the software engineer who orchestrated the chess showdown, told the Register that Google's Gemini chatbot straight up refused a match against the Atari after talking a big game about how it really crushed the old machine.
So Gemini started off really confident, right? And it told Caruso that it would almost certainly dominate Atari chess because it is not a mere large language model and it is more akin to a modern chess engine, which can think millions of moves ahead and evaluate endless positions. So it got a little overconfident there, which is a thing that LLMs tend to do.
But then Caruso mentioned that he was the guy who ran the original ChatGPT versus Atari experiments. And when Gemini asked what stood out from those matches, Caruso told it what stands out is the misplaced confidence both AIs had. They both predicted easy victories, and now you just said you would dominate the Atari.
And so that's when Gemini completely folded. After claiming it hallucinated its chess boasts, it admitted that it would struggle immensely against the Atari chess engine. So it basically said that canceling the match would be the most time efficient and sensible decision. So basically, it chickened out.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great callback to War Games, movies with Matthew
Exactly.
Broderick in the 80s, where, the
Yep.
only way to win is not to play, right?
Exactly.
I also like to think that in my head, I'm envisioning that they're like sitting, at their computers, like, typing this on Twitter, having like a little Twitter battle between Gemini and Robert Caruso, but probably not how it went down.
Probably not.
Anyway, so now we have a 1970s Atari that's beaten ChatGPT, Copilot, and scared off Gemini without even moving a piece. So I think this is a peak, 2025 AI, maybe a little hype content right here.
Absolutely. But there is actually a reason why we wanted to bring this up, and there is a business reason why we wanted to. The overconfidence problem that we sometimes see with AI tools. All three models were absolutely certain
Mm-hmm.
that they would win easily until they actually had to prove it.
Yeah, and this isn't just about chess. Adding these reality checks isn't just about avoiding amusing chess blunders. It's about making AI more reliable, trustworthy, and safe, especially in critical places where mistakes can have real consequences. And that's what Caruso told the Register. And again, I think it's kind of interesting that Gemini would basically say, oh, well, maybe we shouldn't play after it was informed about how the other ones lost, right? So it's almost like you can kind of see how it's thinking through this, but also just being very reactive.
Absolutely. And so for our audience, this is a clue that you should always test AI tools in your actual use case before you rely on them for critical business function. Because as we all know, demos can be really slick and marketing can be really convincing, but the actual real world performance is the thing that matters the most.
And the interesting twist about this in some ways is, Gemini backing down shows better judgment than charging ahead overconfidently like the others did. So sometimes, again, the smartest business decision is recognizing your limitations and not taking on a challenge you're not equipped for.
Exactly. So the lesson isn't that AI is bad, it's that you have to know what your AI tools are actually good at and use them for what they excel at. But, as we always say, always keep a human in the loop for the critical decisions and maybe don't let them play chess against vintage gaming consoles.
I mean, the Atari 2600, humbling billion-dollar AI models since 2025. I would say Atari 3, AI 0. So love
It
that.
really is. So good.
So just to wrap up this week's episode, here's what you can do this week based on our conversation with Sean. Number one, have an honest conversation with your team about what AI tools they're already using. Don't make it scary, just normalize the conversation. Sean's right that people are using AI whether you know it or not.
Quick win number 2, pick one workflow where you use AI regularly and spend 30 minutes this week making it better. So don't use it for speed, just actually work on improving the output. And for the bigger picture, if you're a business leader, if you have a team that works underneath you, this is about leadership, not just technology. Your team is looking to you to how to model AI usage thoughtfully. So if you're not engaging with it, then they're much less likely to as well. Or worse, they'll do it in secret with the whole concept of, shadow AI. And that's something you really don't want. You want to be aware of what your team is doing with your potential, company secrets.
And again, this shadow AI is probably a much larger problem than we all
100%.
realize. So this has been a fascinating episode. So excited to have Sean joining us. And as he showed us, the organizations that succeed will be the ones that set themselves up properly to use these tools effectively. Speaking of which, Jess, make sure you tune in next week for part 3 of our series. Hopefully you didn't just come into part 2 on this one randomly. If you did, go check out part 1. And if you check out part 3 next week with Sean, we'll finally dive deep into building that AI policy and creating the right organizational structure for AI success.
And we'll also spend some time doing a deep dive into the new ChatGPT agents, because I think we all want to know a little bit more about those as well.
Exactly. So if you found this episode helpful, please share it with another business owner, entrepreneur, or just curious professional who's trying to figure out this whole AI thing. Word of mouth is still the best way for shows like ours to grow.
And remember, AI shouldn't be a black box. It should be your unfair advantage. So until next week, keep experimenting, keep learning, stay curious, and we look forward to seeing you next time around.
This is Early Adopter, so thanks for listening. Bye, Jess.
Bye.